All right, diving into 1915 here. And we see an example here of why you want to use specific units, perhaps. We're removing a 124 infantry battalion and brigade and, or no, wait. Yeah, brigade. And we're, it's early. And we're adding one on the same turn. Now, if I'm not using specific units, or if I don't have some rules to indicate who's got to be swapped out, I'm not taking someone off the line here who actually needs to be removed. I'm just going to pop the guy I just got, so I don't have to move him, so I don't have to think. Is that a good or a bad thing? I don't know. It shouldn't. There's, if it was purely a strength point game, there would be no need to worry about it, right? But there is something going on there which maybe is interesting to look at and think about. Oh, this guy's coming off the line and this guy's coming in. I don't know how much purpose it really serves. In terms of if you want to be absolutely historically accurate and know where each unit is at what time, I've given up on that. That's not worth it for me. But then once you get to it, you realize, wow, that was just this. It would have been this annoyance, this little mechanical annoyance where I have to rail up an extra brigade in order, and then rail the other. Well, no, just pull the other one off the map. But and it could be way up at the front, which might not be the unit that actually would have been removed. You probably would have removed one that's seen combat, that needs the rest, or is ready, or whatever, but not the one that's vital. And it's a lot of cases. The whole set of withdrawals is based on kind of this idea of you either withdraw the exact unit no matter what it is, which to me isn't realistic, or you withdraw whatever, which doesn't give that added picture at all, which probably is fine, but it's just an odd choice between them. All right, the biggest attack the Germans punched into a very weak British unit, just a couple of strength points of pretty damaged stuff, trying to entrench here. Then, here. Then that managed to pocket this partially, and they got a whole bunch of units against that, smacked into it, drove it back. They broke through the entrenchment there because they had the opposite sides, no linkage, not enough front connected to be considered a viable trench protection. So that was negated. And it looks like they can do the same thing, just keep rolling up the British line if something doesn't change. Largely ignored over here. Little advance here. And they started bringing the guns up to take Reims out. What they're looking at is they're not too far from creating a pocket out of this entrenched area here. And if they can do that, well, then the French either have to pull out or possibly end up trapped in there. And that would be very, very bad. So, if they can start threatening this sector a little bit more, either by punching this way and this way, and that becomes an untenable position. And that's their main focus here. I stripped the guns out of Brussels. No point in them being there. The Belgians are, I just have no real way to bring them in at this point. They don't make sense because the rules were different. I could have said, January 1st, they're going to be coming in, and then pushed a lot of Germans up there to defend against them. All right, on to the Allied turn. Another attempt by the Allies just to strengthen their lines. Unfortunately, what they've done here, they've actually probably gotten too much strength focused here. That means this salient over here is a little weaker. But, the Germans were threatening and causing this painful situation where it looked like I was attacking with the Allies. I had been to try to break out the Brits here, and so now I've got a stronger, thicker line up in northern France than I really do in the area kind of south of Paris, which I'm very worried about. I'm less worried here. This little pocket is somewhat scary. I may need to start moving some troops into Reims itself if I want to defend that salient. Right now, there just aren't enough in this area, but I started moving my reinforcements into this central location here to move forward. I've also started moving artillery onto the line because, well, as you can see, French got 40 supply points. Brits got 2 new armies in replacement for the BEF. The BEF no longer exists. We've now got 2 armies in position up there. And, you know, I think we're going to hit that stalemate position. I keep crossing my fingers, at least as the Allies, because the Germans have just been able to continue and prolong this offensive much, much further than historically happened. And again, I think it's the Belgians not being in the field that has really made the difference here. You know, it was a close run thing historically. And you take, it's a significant sized little army there. You take that completely out of play, and the Allies are stretched a lot thinner. So I don't feel too badly about the historicity of what we're seeing here. I think it's believable given that the Belgians have been blocked off. Okay, end of the German turn. And I'm finding myself throwing counters away, not sure if I used them or not, because of the replacements, the mechanics of trying to cope with them now. They're just it's too much of a pain in the ass. It really is. I knew it would be a problem, and it is. Even with my rotating and everything, I've got pieces aside, and I can't tell whether I used them or not. So I just threw them out. I figured they're German. The Germans need some damage done to them here. So what have we gotten with the poor Germans? And I don't know why there's so few pieces here. There should be another unit there probably. It's just pushed me beyond my breaking point in terms of what I can deal with in this game. It was already a pretty fiddly game, and now you add this one last thing. And like I said, it's the straw. You know, it brought it from a game that was still interesting to me and still fun to one that, anyway, it must be better on the computer. That's all I got to say. Over here, the Germans managed to punch through using some supply against the English, further degenerating their position. Used a lot of ammo, like 7 points, to bombard Reims. They didn't destroy it, but it's weak enough that it's going to fall. I don't know what the hell the French are going to do. Because another breakthrough down here in the weak point in the line, you know, it's just, there's no standing against this. I thought I had a line here if it had held, or if the Germans hadn't attacked, which was perhaps the most likely, they would have been able to entrench eventually and maybe hold it and have a standby place. But it just looks like it's going to continue like this forever. I don't know. The French are getting more reinforcements, but there's no stabilization that seems there. Now, part of that is, you know, I'm not going to be able to balance the lines completely. Now, I think some of that is not just me being lazy. In fact, a lot of it is not me being lazy. Making a decision to commit over here meant I didn't have the troops over here. The French can't just throw their troops into a zone of control. So the only way to balance the line is to pull back a hex, to retreat from the enemy. That's the only way you can get that kind of balance. Now, I didn't have the kind of force to be able to do that anyway, but I may have to. Because otherwise it means I'll be defending behind the Seine here. These spaces are weakened, are at risk. You can see there's only 2 people on this, but you got 3 stacks on that. I can't stand against it. You know, it's going to fall back. And the French position just looks so precarious. The hinge here is not very strong either. You know, once you start breaking one or another place, it's just going to keep pushing through. I don't know. It doesn't help much that the Allies really look like they're just completely losing the war here. I pulled back behind the sign here. Just trying to make sure with all these counters on top, I'm not sure that everything's actually covered by the French. That's kind of an issue. But, just had to throw some extra troops into Reims. I may have to just fall back from that whole salient. Pulled out of hexes like this and this, where they haven't been lost, and I was entrenching, but I can't hold them. It's hard enough. I hope this is not French, because if it is, that's a lot of troops that I can't afford to have there. But there is no such conglomeration. Even here, I am sliding troops down. I've got extra units down here. I'll be able to strengthen this southern front a little bit. It doesn't really matter. Terrain's not important in this game for the most part. The cities maybe are a little bit, but the important thing is the units, and I can go find someplace else to defend. It's the losses that add up, really. So, I don't know. The Brits pulled back out of their space to solidify their line as well. And, you know, the Germans will flow in and they'll keep attacking. And as it stands, their attacks are being made at a slight advantage in terms of demoralization points, often quite a good advantage, say 5-1 or 5-3 or 5-2, which is a pretty good trade-off. I look at what it would, what the response is that, say, the French could do locally or the British, and they just can't. I don't see the kind of power to be able to punch their way through yet. So, I don't know. Just keep giving ground, and that doesn't feel right. It feels like France would be suing for some sort of peace at this point. So, continuing in the vein, if I'm dealing with things as strength points, and I look in here, well, this turn I'm getting an 8-5 Mountain Division, 8BR. I have the actual correct unit, but the problem is, in no way is it an 8-5. On its full strength side, it's a 12-5. On its half strength, or on its reduced side, it's a 10-5. If I put a -2 marker, it becomes an 8-5. I'm going to go with that. I don't understand. You know, it's not really clear. Again, they don't make it very obvious how to use the reinforcement charts correctly. This creates a bigger unit that can be reinforced, but not really, because the biggest it can get to is a 7. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this unit. You know, it can't be pumped up even as big as an 8. I don't know why it's a 12-5 unit on one side. Maybe it'll come back at some later point as a larger unit after being withdrawn. I just don't know. And that's, you know, one of the little aspects of this game that really kind of irritates me with the countermix, etc. Okay, so the Germans pushed forward a little bit. First, they thumped into this hex here with a mobile attack, and they failed. But then they made a successive attack there when they looked at this and could not really attack it without that success in the mobile attack. They'd actually set up to attack this, but it just looked too ugly. They also, I think they attacked here. They also filled in this hex here, getting the rest of the same line and being able, you know, that'll give them some defensive advantage with a major river running along their front. They can't really attack across it too easily. The French will be able to defend along that. If they can breach that, that's yet another problem for the French, no question. Over here, they tried, I think, pounding forward. They did so here, I think. And then here, they were unable to advance. They looked at the numbers there and didn't like it. I think they also, no, they attacked here and failed. They looked at the numbers here and looked at the amount of supply they'd have to spend, and it just doesn't look cost effective anymore. That's the problem. The German advance is, you know, it is possible to keep going, but it's not really worthwhile, as it were. The Allies are going to run out of supply points in the sense that they have to launch an offensive, I think, before the Germans will. And you know, it's just kind of running out of really valuable attacks where even if you do end up turning the flank, you won't have enough supply or breaking through. They're just not getting enough supply to continue the attacks because the defender's spending less overall. Even though the defender spends at twice the rate per unit, remember those units are tripled in general if they don't retreat. So basically, if you can't force the enemy to retreat, it's really kind of questionable to actually attack them. Your supply costs are higher. At least that's the way I'm figuring it here. The attacks that I've seen, I mean, the attack made here was a good number attack. There was a good chance of them pushing the French out of there. This one would not have been as good a chance. This would have been impossible. So here, the British are going to have to pull out again because they lose their trenchant benefit here, unless they can do some kind of counterattack. But I don't think that's going to happen. And here we are halfway through January, basically. The English have pulled back. They've also pulled northward, and their headquarters is down in Rouen. Actually, I get to replace one of these units. I'll put something in there because they didn't move. They just landed on top of their headquarters. The headquarters didn't have to move. The French have moved up to cover more of the line. There's very little English left at all. And the French are stretching this line a little further. There's danger they get pushed out of, say, here. I think that's not completed yet. So that's a possible tasty treat for the Germans to gain. German troops will, of course, move forward again. Down here, trying to cover that river line somehow. That's getting difficult. There was thoughts about pulling out of this hex, but while this is somewhat more defensible, I'm building the entrenchments here. If I can hold this, it gives me a little bit more breathing room there. And we're not seeing any collapse over here. I was trying to figure out how to extricate this unit, which is a powerful unit. However, it is in kind of it's really not in that dangerous a location. So it seemed like an excellent candidate. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to start swapping it towards the rest of the line. Because if I can get that in here, I'll be in a better position there overall. I don't really need that strong a unit there. Will it hold? Who knows? I keep thinking it will, but the Germans keep surprising me. They seem to be grinding down again, but then they turn around and find new holes. And they're not really grinding down that much. They're concentrating their efforts in different areas each time, wherever the weakness occurs, wherever troops have to be pulled off. They've got kind of interior lines, so they can shift around. Plus, they can take the rail. They can load up in the hex that's in a zone of control. They can ride the rails someplace. They can get off, and they can wander into the battle after that. They can't ride the rails right into a zone of control. That gives them a lot more flexibility between the interior lines and that they're able to really deploy their troops a lot more quickly. New reinforcements, you kind of have to plan these to turn in advance, as it were. The replacements have gone here, and I think these are regular troops. I think I pushed them up here. Kind of I should have enough here, so I'm not sure here, and I know this is weak because I've stretched the line. And you got to kind of guess, because wherever the Germans actually hit. I'm also moving, you can see the German artillery is beginning to pull off the line, the heavy artillery, to make its way and start sieging Paris if I get enough points. I view that as important, because if I can knock these Parisian fortresses out, well, that forces the French to cover that area. Right now, they've got this big, nasty block sitting right in the middle of the German line. All right.
Units need ammunition to attack and defend. Ammunition in the game is represented by supply points. Supply points are carried around by headquarters. The number of supply points a particular headquarters has is shown on the supply track. Every headquarters in the game has a corresponding marker for the supply track. Looking here at the supply track, the German 8th Army headquarters has 22 supply points, while the Russian 1st Army headquarters has 17. When a headquarters expends supply points for units, the player moves the marker on this track to show the expense. In order to attack or defend at full strength, units expend supply points from a nearby headquarters. If they cannot do so, they participate in combat unsupplied, which means they will be at half strength. It costs 1 supply point to supply 4 strength points in an attack. It costs 1 supply point to supply 2 strength points in a counterattack. The difference is due to the attacker both moving and firing, while the defender is mostly just firing. Let's look at an example we've used before in learning about the basics of combat in the game. In this example, the Germans are attacking the Russians in hex 2606 with 20 strength points. At a rate of 1 supply point per 4 attacking strength points, the Germans would need to expend 5 supply points from the nearby 8th Army headquarters so that all of the involved units could attack at full strength. There are 8 Russian strength points in hex 2606. At a rate of 1 supply point for every 2 counterattacking strength points, the Russian player would need to expend 4 supply points from the nearby Russian 1st Army headquarters so that all of his units could counterattack at full strength. It is always a player's choice to expend available supply points or not. Just realize that not expending the supply will have the combat strength of the unit. For defending units, this halving is done prior to the doubling or tripling for counterattack. Players can expend supply for some units or just for some strength points and not for the others. The supplied portion would use their full strength while the unsupplied portion would be halved. In this example, let's say the Germans opted to supply 12 of the attacking strength points by spending 3 supply points. The remaining 8 strength points would then attack unsupplied at half strength. So the Germans in this case would attack with 12 plus 4 for a total effective strength of 16. And 16 is the column they would then use on the combat results table. The path from a unit to its supporting headquarters is called a supply line. The length of the supply line is defined by the number of movement points it would take to move from the unit to the headquarters. Note that supply line length does not include the cost of enemy zones of control it might pass through. There are adverse effects for units with long supply lines. Attacking units must be within 4 movement points of their headquarters to get the full benefits of being supplied. Defending units, on the other hand, can be up to 8 movement points away before suffering any negative effects due to their supply lines being too long. If units are further away from their headquarters than the allowable distance, their strength is reduced for every extra movement point of supply line length. So, if an attacking unit is 5 movement points away from its supplying headquarters, its strength is reduced by 1, even though it has the necessary supplies expended for it. At a distance of 6 movement points from the headquarters, the attacking unit's strength would be reduced by 2, and so on. Note that at some point, units with really long supply lines might as well conduct combat unsupplied. Now let's look at an example of the effects of long supply lines. The German units in hexes 1905 and 1906 are attacking the Russians in hex 2005. The German units are being supplied by the 8th Army headquarters in Hex 1507. First, let's look at their supply lines. This is the supply line for the 41st Division in Hex 1905. It's 6 movement points long. So it'd be 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And this is the supply line for the units in Hex 1906. Tracing from the unit to the headquarters, it's 5 movement points long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just to point out some issues supply lines may have, I've added a slight complication. I want to point out that you can trace a supply line through a hex in an enemy zone of control only if there's a friendly unit in the hex. So the units in 1906 can trace their supply line through Hex 1707, even though this hex is in an enemy zone of control, because the 4th Brigade is there. They could not trace a supply line through Hex 1607 because there's no friendly unit there to negate the enemy zone of control. So they trace their supply through Hex 1606. Note too that the enemy zone of control does not add to the length of the supply line. Now back to the units involved in the combat. The German player decides to fully supply the attack. The attacking German units have a combined strength of 18. To fully supply them, the German would need to expend 5 supply points. The long supply lines of these units now come into play. The unit in 1905 has a 6 movement point long supply line. Due to this, it would only be attacking at strength 6. This is because its supply line is 2 movement points longer than normally allowed, and therefore its effective strength is reduced by 2. Each of the units in 1906 have a 5 movement point supply line. Even though they are fully supplied, each would only attack at strength 4. This is because their supply line is 1 movement point longer than allowed. So the German in this case would actually attack with 14 strength points, not 18, on the combat results table. I want to show you the little secrets to how a wise player manages supplies. To better use his supply points to his advantage, the German player in the example could decide to save a supply point by only supplying the 8-5 in Hex 1905 and a combined 8 strength points from the 2 units in 1906. The German player would expend 4 supply points to supply 16 attacking strength points. The 8-5, the 41st Infantry Division, and 4 points each from the reserve divisions in 1906. As we've already discussed, the 8-5 in Hex 1905, although supplied, will only attack with 6 strength points due to the length of its supply line. The German player decides to only supply 4 strength points of each of the 5-5 reserve divisions in Hex 1906. Each therefore has 1 unsupplied strength point. These unsupplied strength points can still participate in the attack, but at half strength. Since there are 2 such unsupplied strength points, combined they provide a single point of actual attack strength. The 5-5s still suffer a penalty for the length of their supply lines. Although the German player only supplies 4 strength points of each unit, the effective strength of the supplied portions are just 3 apiece, due to the 5 movement point supply line length. So in this case, with the German player expending 4 supply points, he would have an effective strength of 6 from the unit in 1905, plus 3 from the supplied portions of the units in Hex 1906, plus 1 more due to the unsupplied strength points from the 1906 units, for a total effective attack strength of 13. Another option could be that the German player could decide to have both of the units in Hex 1906 participate in the attack completely unsupplied. In this case, he would only expend 2 supply points for the unit in Hex 1905. This unit, plus the now unsupplied units in 1906, would have a total effective attack strength of 11. I went through all of these options because I wanted to point out how you should wisely use your supply points. There are never enough of them, and I recommend that you always try to get the most out of them. Players can attempt to brush aside weak forces while moving during their movement phase. The procedure for doing this is called column attack. The name column attack refers to units hastily attacking without bothering to deploy for a more regular and effective attack. Units performing column attacks are doing just that, attacking while still organized in marching columns. Column attacks are much less effective than normal attacks, since the moving units can only bring a fraction of their combat power to bear. Column attacks are conducted at half strength. Units stop moving when they conduct a column attack and cannot resume movement, except possibly to advance after the column attack combat. Column attacks may only be performed by individual units or by stacks of units that begin the movement phase together and move together as a stack up until conducting the column attack. Let's look at an in-depth example. Here's the situation at the start of the German movement phase. Note that there are 4 German units together in Hex 2205. There are 2 8.5s and 2 5.5s for a combined total of 26 strength points. Since they have started the movement phase in the same hex, this stack, the 4 units in Hex 2205, are capable of conducting a column attack. But first, to reduce supply line lengths, the German player moves the 8th Army headquarters from 1907 up to 2205. 1, 2, 3, 4 movement points. And now the stack that started in 2205 moves. It moves through 2204 over to 2304, expending 3 movement points. It stops there so it can conduct a column attack against the Russian 5th Rifle Brigade in Hex 2404. Column attacks require the expenditure of supply, just like normal combat. In this case, the German player fully supplies the 26 strength point stack by spending 7 supply points from the 8th Army headquarters. Since they are conducting a column attack, the German stack, now in 2304, conducts the attack at half strength, so they will use the 13 column on the combat results table. Let's say that the German player rolls a 3 and causes a loss of 2 strength points to the Russians. This will force the Russian brigade in 2404 to retreat and suffer a 1 strength point loss. The Russian player takes the 1 strength point loss and retreats the unit to 2504. There are significant advantages to counterattacking when subjected to a column attack. The defenders of a column attack are doubled before they are again doubled or tripled for the counterattack. In this case, let's say the Russian player expends 1 supply point from the 1st Russian Army to supply the brigade for the counterattack. The 2 strength point unit would first be doubled due to being attacked by a column attack, then it would be doubled again as a retreating unit that is counterattacking. This means that the retreated brigade would counterattack using the 8 column on the combat results table, and they are guaranteed to inflict a 1 strength point loss on the Germans. The German player takes this loss with one of the 5 5s in the stack, placing a -1 strength marker on it. Let's bring one in, place it on the unit. Since the Russian brigade retreated, the column attacking Germans can advance into the vacated hex. They do so, moving in the reduced strength division first, and then both of the 8-5s, leaving a single 5-5 in hex 2304. This is still the movement phase, so the German player can continue moving other units. Note that the units that conducted the column attack are now done with movement and cannot move any further, even though they still had movement points available. The German player now moves the 1st Division from 2405 to 2404. It too will conduct a column attack against the now reduced brigade in 2504. To do so, the German player expends 2 more supply points from the 8th Army headquarters. The German 1st Division would attack using the 4 column since it's at half strength for conducting a column attack. Note also that his die roll would be reduced by 2 due to the terrain effect of the river. So if the German rolls a 6, he will cause the Russian brigade to retreat again. But let's say he doesn't, and there is no effect on the Russian defender. The Russian 5th Brigade can now counterattack against this new column attack from the German 1st Division. The Russian player again opts to pay 1 supply point from the 1st Russian headquarters to supply the counterattack. The 1 strength point is doubled due to being subjected to a column attack. Then it is tripled due to being a non-retreating defender. The overall result is that the Russian brigade will counterattack on the 6th column, plus 1 will be added to the counterattack die roll due to the river. Let's say the Russian is lucky and rolls a 6. This means that they inflict a 2 strength point loss on the Germans. So the German 1st Division is reduced to a strength of 6. Let's show that here. It still is movement phase, so the German player continues to move units. He moves the 1st Landwehr Brigade from hex 2104 1, 2, 3, 4 over to join the other units in hex 2404. He moves the 6th Landwehr Brigade from 2004 over to 2103. And then he moves the 35th Reserve Ersatz Division from 2506 over to 2405. He then moves the Cavalry Division in 2305. This unit will conduct column movement, increasing its movement allowance from 6 to 9, so long as it does not enter an enemy zone of control. Let's follow the unit as it moves. Here, 1 movement point, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9 movement points to get to hex 2401. The German player then declares the end of his movement phase. All of the units that conducted column attacks in the movement phase are allowed to participate in attacks during the combat phase. Note that the German units in 2404 are well poised to attack and advance into 2504, and that the Russian divisions in hexes 2303 and 2403 are in danger of being surrounded as a result.
Germans had to withdraw some more units here in the Western Front, but they maintained their offensive, attacking here, and drove a combined Allied force out of there. Only the Brits are left. Again, seeking out wherever the weak points are, a similar case. Here they set themselves up for this massive attack on this hex. Chickened out of it. It would have required something like 7 supply points to do a good job. And they're spending a couple supply points on each of these attacks. So they managed to cross the Seine up here where it's kind of, it's a minor river up here instead of a major river. It just changes right there. It's giving them this extra impetus. Can the French get enough force to make an attack here, for example? That's tough. You know, there's 12 strength points there. But that's 36 defensive points of fire coming back. They're unlikely to have that much. They're unlikely to be able to do 6 points of damage. They're going to have to get up on the 40 table or something like that. They just don't have the troops to pull that off. The Germans did not launch any other attacks. In fact, they set up all their artillery here. And then I looked again, and the supply cost was just too high. Plus, that's a city center, so it halves the attack. Because it's a city center with an urban, I think there's at least 2 urban hex sites, whatever it is. They're getting the major city benefit. So that knocks out the doubling effect that the artillery has. It's just not worth it. You know, firing on them, again, it would have cost something like 8. It would have been attacking on the 24 table. Actually, I could have thrown more in. I would have gotten about +3 on the table, cost 4 or 5 hits. Yeah, that's a pretty decent amount of damage, but not for 8 supply. Granted, I've got to do something about Paris if I'm going to continue this with the Germans. But it's tough, you know, it's really tough. It's not going to knock it out. 4 or 5 hits, it's still going to be a 30-something point fortress. I don't have all those Austrian artillery left. I don't have this, and I don't have the supply to feed the artillery. I've got other German artillery. Maybe I got to bring that all up, but it's just tough to do. Anyway, got some Germans I forgot to deal with back here. There were replacement points. I got to bring them up. Well, this attack may have been an attack too far. You can see the Germans are still there, and there's still a gap. The French surrounded it as much as they could, launched an attack. Both sides spent 7 supplies. No, I'm sorry. Mistake. Both sides spent supplies on it. I don't remember how much. We're talking 36 for the French, so that's 6 supply for them. The Germans, probably not enough. Thinking what I spent. It was 16 strength points. Should have been 4 supply, I believe. I actually did spend that much. I'm not positive. I may have only spent 3. I don't know. Anyway, both sides lost 7 factors. Not quite enough to force the Germans to retreat. Actually, the Germans would have liked to retreat. They do not like where they are. They can always pull back. But this is opening up some real conundrums for them. If they could launch an attack on this, get enough force on that. But in 3 hexes, they probably had enough force. The 4th hex isn't really necessary. There's still retreat routes open, so it's not like they're cutting anything there. So they can't push forward. This is not terribly weak. It's not strong. 4 strength points there. It would only take a 2-hit to make that retreat and take the artillery out. But that's just going to keep, if they push this way, that's going to keep stretching that German line further and further, and it may just be at the breaking point very shortly. I don't know, but I may have to start shifting German troops down into this new little breach, and that's kind of an ugly situation. Over here, the British and French have combined up again and are kind of mixing mixing up their defenses there. One of the problems the Germans had is they're outside their supply line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because it's winter, they take a penalty per division, and so they were 3 strength points less than they would have otherwise been, which kind of hurt their situation too. They're going to have to shift their army, and they've got things they were kind of planning on recuperating back there. Whatever. All right, we move on. Well, the Germans could only find one place they wanted to attack, which was right here. They massed a bunch of troops, pushed the mountain unit that was up against the river. Didn't matter because it's negated by this. Everywhere else, they're just looking at they really can't afford to advance. Trying to push around here and do something, it doesn't make sense. So the French are able to leave a gap in our line, and the Germans just can't exploit it. There's too big a power here. These strong forces are just too threatening. Spreading that line out would mean getting it cut off, probably. In fact, I'm kind of even worried about what is here. We got, I don't know, somewhere around 10 strength points there. That's probably enough to hold the line. And if it gets cut, we can still trace supply through there because we did gain this hex. Decent amount of supply was spent, I think 2-3 points by the Germans, the French as well. The Germans don't know how weak the French are. They can't guess. You're not allowed to look at each other's sheets. The French are not in that bad a shape. The Germans think, well, maybe if I keep pushing. But it's gotten to the point of, I can't be sure. I can't be sure that I can keep cracking it. And to tell you the truth, they actually really can't. They can't push it. They probably, the defenses have gotten to the point where it is really actually too tough to keep pushing everywhere. Finding one little place to do a limited offensive, gain a hex. That's where we're at now. And I think we're at the point where the German advance has stalled. But I've said that several times already. And, they keep finding. So there's things like this, little hexes like this. This is going to be open next. There's no reason for the French to stay there anymore. But is there a real reason for them to withdraw from it? I don't know. I mean, if they pull back here, they're just pulling further from their line. It's only by connecting their line up that they can get something. This is an unimportant hex, and it has no defensive advantages. So they probably don't want to stay there. But this one here has limited advantages. It's got a 1 bonus, which will help. So I think we're going to see the French fall back a little further again. French pulled back, stiffened this line as much as they can. This is the weak point right now, and the Germans can hit that fairly hard. I think I want to swap these units because of that. Because that was just too weak. That's 2 strength points. That's hitting it from here, fine. If they want to cross the Seine, half strength, whatever, better luck to them. But, they're going to face woods here as well. I should be able to maybe hold that. Let's take a look at the line now. See what we've got. Nothing's changing along here. This is exactly the same. We got this little bulge here that occurred during the winter. But then down here. And then up on the British front. This sector has just really broken open, and a lot of ground was gained during this winter. Painful. All right. Germans have stretched too far. I pushed across the Seine. I'm not attacking. I set things up for an attack here, but I counted it up. There's just too many French there. 13 French. I need to do 7 hits. If I had the supplies, I could do it, but I've only got 5 supplies. If I spent those, I think that puts me to 54. There's a -1 on the table. I would need to roll a 4 or higher. 50-50 chance of breaking this. It would be a big deal to break it. There's no question. But here's the problem. I don't have the supply. I don't have the rail lines anymore. I've got one headquarters that I've moved up beyond its rail net. I can no longer just pull supplies or troops into there as easily. So I had to shift this headquarters over. That means I can't throw the supplies to the headquarters without shifting more headquarters and weakening the situation beyond belief. And that would be just to spend all my supply points. I don't think I can push any further with the Germans at this point for this month. And once the entrenchments take place, I think it's time to wait for the offensives. I'm not sure I'm thrilled with having my Germans sit beyond the river here. Not if I'm going to keep pushing. I may pull back. It may be time in the next turn to pull my troops back and then try to devote myself to the defensive line with the intention of forcing the Allies to take the offensives from now on. Somebody's going to have to. And there's the, if you got troops, you got to, or if you got supplies, you got to use them rule. Well, up until 1917, Germany can have 200. They're going to be getting 30 a turn for a while. They're not going to hit anywhere near there until late in the year. And if the French have to do an offensive, the French cannot have more than 150. Ooh, Great Britain 120. I'm not too worried about Great Britain, but France's 150 means that they are going to have to. They make 40 a turn. They're going to have to do something. So I think the Germans are going to pull back. I'll trim things up with the Allies, and we've probably seen the end of this Schlieffen plan into the winter offensive. Yeah, with a couple big German divisions coming off the line, they had to remove 2 8-pointers. Now, I took some pretty badly mauled units, although not the worst in the world, and made up the rest with replacement points. But that gets 2 of their big divisions off the line. And at this point, they're 5-6 point, actually 4 or 5 point units. So it wasn't that terrible. They could get worse. I don't think I have any that are. Pulling back seemed like the only answer. And so here we see the Brits taking more and more of their line. They're occupying part of the line down to here now again. They've been able to get replacement points, and they're going to have a decent-sized army back pretty soon. The French shifting down to cover this. Plans, move into Paris. Start putting some threat on this whole salient, this little pocket back here. Make it ugly for the Germans. Make it real ugly. I don't know why this guy's back here. I've pulled my headquarters back to the rail line. I can't afford to not have them on the rails. We got another winter turn coming, so I think we'll see a lot of digging in along this line. I don't think the French are going to have the kind of points to launch a serious offensive during February. We'll see. But the Germans have more or less decided, all right, it's their turn next. They're the ones who are going to have to, spend the bloodshed. And they're going to have to spend it against a real line. All right, up it goes. Well, the mystery of the German mountain unit that was missing has been solved. It was on the turn record track with a value that it does not have here in July. Somehow, I don't know, it didn't get placed in the earlier and got placed in the later. Maybe because I found 2 counters with that name on it that I tried to determine which one to put where. But, none of the values, well, the full strength value is there originally of the regular unit. Now it's been pulled out. It can never reach that full strength. That may be wrong. Maybe it can. Let's see. Now I can reach one under that full strength now. And then someday it upgrades to the assault unit, which doesn't really matter. I'm not going to worry about the numbers on the units. The hell with them. But I mean, it's just such a headache dealing with setting up the reinforcements, placing them. And then when it comes to when they actually come in, usually you're withdrawing stuff. Oh, look, I forgot about a German replacement that has to find some place to live. Oh, well. So I didn't even finish them up. All right. Well, into July, and we'll throw the supplies out and see sometime late in this month, I think we're going to see an assault. So I basically just flew through about, 3 turns. Took about 5 minutes per turn, really. Plus I went and made some tea and everything. But you know what? Nothing's happening. It's just shifting these troops around. One of the problems is finding the units that are damaged so that you can recuperate them. This is more of a problem in a sense for the Germans because they actually were at a point where they had all their troops on the board. Otherwise, you could just keep building the units, the new units. Of course, you don't get enough replacements to build those up to full strength. And it's kind of nice to have full strength units, especially for an offensive. That's where the French are beginning to peter out now. They're out of their 6-point units damn near, which means I pretty much have to pull units off the line. But for example, with the Brits, I'm having trouble finding a damaged unit. I see some damage markers. They're flipped units, but it's hard to tell what can and can't be. So like this flip unit is flipped because it was a 9.5 BEF unit on the back. It's now a 7, and it's permanently that. So you really kind of have to investigate a lot of the counters to find one, and you kind of find them by accident. It's not like you have some, oh yeah, I know there's units here that need to be repaired. Because when you're trying to smooth the line, you're doing exactly the opposite to what's conducive to finding the units. You're spreading them around, shifting them everywhere, which way. So, you end up with not a clear idea of what's where. Another thing to note, even the victory conditions, the demoralization factors, have a slight annoyance edge to me. I was noticing, oh, look, we're at 800 for the Germans now. They've caught up to the French. This is because of the 65 turn. I don't remember if I paid at the beginning of this turn. I don't really care. I ended up paying again because I think I forgot to. But that's not parity. Okay. Germany gets affected at 3,000. France gets affected at 1,500. These numbers cannot be compared. They're just numbers on a track related to numbers in the rules, and there's nothing to help you. That's kind of the problem I have with a lot of the feelings of the game. It doesn't feel like the designer put too much effort to make this easier to play. It's not a terribly complicated game, but the whole game is kind of some innovative ideas on a very, very standard old-time type framework. The innovative idea is the firepower table, and a number of other factors. Certainly the map with its little hex sides, etc. The demoralization for a game of this type. It's not, hey, you need these cities, because that's not what World War I was about. It's pretty clear. It's hard to tell what World War II. It's harder to tell what World War II was about. But World War I was clearly about just grinding the opponent's economy down, essentially, and their manpower, etc., their military ability to resist. So that all makes sense. But they're all put together in a way that doesn't terribly make it easier, or more attractive, say, in the case of the map or whatever. But I don't know what you can do there. There's a point at which you have to make these compromises. You have to say, okay, either I have to cut the Gordian knot and come up with something completely different, or I have to trim away some of the mechanics, some of the complexity, whatever. And it's not like there's a lot of complexity here. In order to provide something that's going to be able to reach more people. And I don't feel like this has done that. I feel like this has really refused to make those compromises and ended up in something that, as I've noted, is difficult to actually play. You know, I mean, what I want to be doing is I want to be allocating to some extent or another these grand offensives, and it's certainly capable. It's certainly possible to do that, but I'm all tied up in this moving my units around and trying to get everything perfect, and these responses shifting back and forth. So the French have been pushing forces here into the Paris region. I've got to shift more of my German weight into that sector. I've got to worry about the British. For the British, they're at a point where actually they kind of need to attack because they need to kill some men. They're beginning to pull up replacement points. So they may need to do an offensive. Just a minor one, just to kill some guys. To me, these are, I don't know, too many little piddly factors that are getting in the way of some sort of broad scheme. And in a sense, the actual motivation to why you're attacking, I got to kill men, I got to waste supply points, whatever it is part of the problem. It's not a grand scheme. It's I have to do these little administrative things to keep going. And it really doesn't make that much difference. I'm going to cause a certain amount of damage on my offensives, and I'm going to take a certain amount of damage. I don't want them to be too broad because, well, that may put me at risk. Of course, you could push your chances. You could say, okay, well, the Germans might run out of supply before I do, and then I'll get an advantage there or whatever. And that's what we saw, was the Germans managed to crush the French supply enough that they could take their, hey, I get the supplies at the first of the month. I get to maybe make a breakthrough on that turn, even if the fortification lines are in place, etc. I don't think we're going to be at that position again. I don't know. It doesn't feel like the Allies have that kind of desire to completely crush the Germans through that massive offensive. But maybe that's the right spirit to achieve the real goals. It's difficult for me to play that way, to try to break the other guy's supplies beforehand. I think that would produce the right dynamics, but it's tiresome. It's really tiresome for me to do that. I can appreciate that will cause realistic play, historical play. But I can also say, I'm not sure I want to do that. The calculation of the offensives, etc., is kind of painful. Especially when you run up against it and you do it for a few turns and you're not going to break through until you wear their supplies out. That's the tough call for me. Now, maybe it'll happen eventually. Maybe I'll push it that far eventually. But so far this year, I have not. And for all those wrong reasons, an Allied offensive is launched in the Paris salient. It's a weak spot for the Germans. It was a good place to hit. It's kind of interesting. It's almost always during the opponent's turn that I notice where I want to hit, because it's basically where I'm saying, there's a weakness there. I got to do something about it. I can't. Well, as a player, I might be paying that attention too. But it's just kind of funny that it's always the moment where the enemy learns about that mistake and says, fuck it. It's just too hard. That I end up jumping in and slamming in. But this is one such case. Quite often when I'm playing in an opposed game, I'm sitting on something like that, and I'm getting away with it for a couple of turns saying, can I just get my troops there? Do I have time? That never happens here. Once I notice it, if I don't fix it, it's going to get slammed in a game like this, especially where there isn't any other controls. But that's okay. It provides, a framework for which those decisions end up being made, and that's fine. Anyway, it didn't work very well. The Allied forces, even with the artillery bonus, etc., took 11 hits versus 7 for the Germans. But the Brits really did need to damage their Canadians so that they can funnel. They have like one replacement chit for them, and they're going to get another one this next month. So they have to hit with those Canadians and get them damaged. They may have to hit another round, but now the Germans really do need to push into that area, especially this hex, and try to repair the situation there. Hopefully they have troops, but it doesn't look like it. Doesn't look like they have much. So they may have to try shifting stuff, which is always a royal pain. All right, on to the last turn of the month. And the turn ends with the assault continuing on this space here. The Allies got less strength into the play. The Germans actually got more by shifting this big old artillery. And granted, it's only doubled instead of tripled, but that was able to give them more power in total. But their line is rather stretched at this point, and, well, it doesn't look like they have any withdrawals next turn. But they also don't have any reinforcements coming in. They've just got their replacement points. They got some troops that they're putting together up here that they can throw into that sector. And we can see if that's enough to stem the flow. Because really, once that is stopped, the Allies, once it gets ugly enough in that area, the Allies don't really want to continue the attack. And elsewhere, it's ugly too. They don't want to make an attack here, even though they have the river line crossed and it's good terrain. They just don't have the strength. That's a pretty big stack there. So this is not the optimal assault any longer. You want to switch fronts. Well, to tell you the truth, nobody really needs to spend anything anymore. Why go in without sort of max strength, as it were? Well, maybe because the Germans are a little weaker, but they don't feel a lot weaker. And I just don't have that, I can grind them down before attitude. And, part of it is because I do know the history, and I do know that didn't work. They didn't really get that huge breakthrough in 15. Now, in 16, they got some significant ground broken through. But the situation just doesn't look like they're going to be able to break them. It was very easy for me with the Germans to continue the assaults that I was making. It's very hard for me to continue with the Allies here. I don't feel like I have any grasp. If I broke through the trench, if I got that initial breakthrough, then I would keep going. But without that initial breakthrough, well, now there are better places to attack. And why am I doing it this turn anyway? Just halt the whole thing. And there's no real cost to that, unlike in La Grande Guerre, where there is a cost to halting an offensive. You make a big deal about an offensive. You can make these minor attacks, and that's what I feel like I'm doing. But once you start a major offensive, whatever that is, and I feel like I already started one and it failed, there is a cost to the national will of, hey, we didn't get anywhere. We lost this many bodies. Yeah, maybe we killed more enemy, but that was hard to justify. The body bag mentality hadn't set in quite yet at this point. Anyway, up this one goes. Well, as I push into August, I notice, gee, I gave the French probably 3 extra replacement units that I shouldn't have. And now comes the real problem. Because every 10th French replacement unit, which happened to work out fine when they get odd even 1, 2, 1, 2. Of course, the rules don't say that. They say 1, 1. But clearly that's a typo because they wouldn't have expressed it the way they did. That worked out so that they got a 10th one every turn. Now, I have no idea how to keep track of how many is every 10th. I can keep a little marker, another little counter, or keep it on paper or something. But it's an annoyance because now they're only producing 7 a turn. So on the 3rd turn of next month, they're going to get one. And then on the 6th turn of the month, it's just this annoyance where they get these North African special replacement units, which really don't do much except demand that it makes it harder to keep the North African units at full strength, you end up with a lot of smaller units, or maybe you have to direct something to the line, the replacements to a particular place in the line, pull a unit out, maybe direct another unit there so that you can fill its gap while it replenishes. Just more of that extreme fiddly aspect. Anyway, I'm going to say the hell with it, just as I did with the 65 German demoralization points I added last time. In this case, I know I made a mistake, but I don't know what to do. And I screwed up and gave the Germans an extra one earlier. And maybe, they got the Belgians knocked out. So it's a different world, right? Anyway, but that's the point. When there's all this attempt to get this realism with such a significant effort to get all the numbers right and all the units that come in at the right time and in and out and everything, well, it ends up, at least in this player's case, causing bigger problems with the historicity, because I can't cope with, I can't manage the level of mechanical actions that's required for this game. So I end up screwing up more than I would in a game that would be less historically, fine-tuned, but worried a little bit more about making it playable so you don't screw up all the time and end up making your actual play experience less historical than you would get with that simpler, cleaner system. Thus is. All right, well, I'll continue trying to set up my replacements and such now. So we break into August 1915, and I confused what I've already got on here. Probably taped it from over in the corner while I was setting up the lines. The offensives have stopped. The British were positioned themselves to set up for an offensive here, and then chose not to do it. It was just too expensive. And the big thing is, when I finally found, as I was setting it all up, the Canadian unit that I need to replenish, or that was in reasonably good shape, that I thought was in reasonably good shape at least, well, it turns out I had damaged it last turn. So, some of this is me walking away from the game. You can't. That's one of the problems. Every time you spend time away from the game, and I tend to play my games in little chunks, it becomes easier to forget things. And in this case, well, I don't need to launch an offensive because I've lost all the British units I need to. I counted up my French points, and let me think. I better recount them. I don't know if I was at 115 or what, but I thought I was just at the level I need to be, which would be like 105, because that'll put me to 145. But I'm not sure now. I'm worried that I was at 145 and that I have to launch an offensive this month. If I don't have to launch one, I'm not going to. I'm going to continue to allow the Germans to take their withdrawals, because they aren't gaining anything this turn except replacement points. That allows them to strengthen, but I'm gaining replacement points too, and it just doesn't seem like an attack will tremendously help me. On the other hand, I've got most of my big units on the board, and the Germans have lost some significant units, so maybe it would be a good idea to make an attack this month anyway. I don't know. Still tossing the idea back and forth. But really, it's all determined by the, hey, what have I lost, What am I going to be putting on the line? Because if all I'm going to be able to rebuild is these 3-point units here, they're not going to help any offensive. They just plug the gaps as I'm repairing in between waves or something. All right, we'll see. I'll recount. But I think the French are in the position where they don't have to make one. They're certainly not continuing with anything this turn. Yeah, I count 175 points over here, which means they've got almost two whole months before they have to press another offensive. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I think this month and next month they probably will not. We'll see. Well, I just improved my life, and at least my gaming life, significantly, as well as the quality of the videos. I put in an incandescent bulb. Now, supposedly these green energy bulbs I had in here were supposed to be the equivalent of 100 watts of power. You saw that sepia tone and kind of darkness. One bulb I replaced, one, over in this lamp over here. And you're getting, it's only a 75 watt. It's just so much cleaner and clearer. It's just pathetic. You know, what happened was my videos decreased in value and my vision and everything here because my last incandescent bulb burned out, and I had invested in, I don't know, I had a couple boxes of these green ones and got a huge crate of them from my electric company for free. They're just crap. Anyway, what do we have here? Just more of the same. Both sides really just filling out. We're here on the, we just finished the 4th turn of August. And, you know, I'm just going to keep playing through this until we get to a point where I have to make another assault. And winter assaults may be the advantageous ones, although they're kind of painful for the attacker. The attacker knows where he's going to land the blow. The defender doesn't. So it may become kind of, although it's unlikely because you can rail the headquarters around and get the supplies wherever you like, it might become a little bit more of a hassle for the defender to put something in place during winter. The game seems to have no other weather effects, so I think that may be a little weird. I don't know. Certainly I expect mud and stuff like that to come along. As I hit the 6th turn, I've covered it, I think. Somewhere in here I've got a unit, but let me show you the equivalent. It's over here, these Guards English divisions. They're kind of interesting. According to the rules, they're size 8, great. They have this red 8 on them. Now, all the replacements, I think, have either a red 7. Yeah, they all have a red 7 on them. I don't know what these things mean. Nothing can replace them by the rules. The number, the circle doesn't matter. The color of the circle matters in terms of, yes, it's a color or it's not. But it also has to have the correct number according to the rules, which is what prevents you from building, say, German units. Somewhere I have guards that have little -1 markers. There's one under here. But they have an 8 in the white circle. I don't know if that means that the British Guards can never be replaced. That's what the rules would tend to indicate. On the other hand, it feels a little goofy and a little bit of a disadvantage that they can't restock their Guards units in the same way that everyone else can, pretty much. It just disturbs me. I'm not sure that that's intended. The red 8, the 8 in there kind of indicates, yeah, I can pump my Guards up to 8s. And that's how I'm taking it. But it's not clearly, it's not explained as any kind of exception in the rules. And it's one of those kind of, geez, I don't know. I don't know how much sense this makes, but the British Guard did receive reinforcements. Did it get as good as it ever was? How come the German Guards are limited to normal division size? You know, and that's an irritation in terms of strength points, because I'd like to fix that additional hit so that I don't have stacks with the minuses on them. But that clearly is against the rules. But with those British 8 circled units, I think if I was playing by the rules, they couldn't be recuperated at all. Such is. All right, onward into the rest of them. And we're pushing into September of 15. And, you know, this has taken me 20 minutes since the late comment, right? At most. Anyway, the French have come to a decision. They want more firepower to hit hexes. Expending supply is never a big deal. That's your duty, essentially. Losing troops is a big deal, and making the enemy lose more troops is a good thing. Supply doesn't seem to be the limitation on your ability to act anymore. Well, I mean, it is. Obviously, if you had infinite supply, you could keep attacking and attacking and attacking, but your troops would wear out. On the other hand, supply is more this motivator in the way the game works. So I'm going to start expending my replacements to start building back those artillery. I can build them back at 2 for 1. Now, it's kind of weird because they're not really replacement points, but there's special rules to handle Marines, artillery, and maybe something else, mountain units, where their little numbered circles don't really count for what you'd think they would. There's no replacement artillery points, for example. You have to kind of buy them on the fly as you're rebuilding. Now, you can use 2 artillery units to recombine, or 2 mountain units or whatever. So they're kind of a little stickier in terms of you can't turn infantry into these things as normal. You can only use the replacements. And I like that aspect. But anyway, I'm going to have to start buying those back because basically I've got all my heavy units. Right now, there are some things I can rebuild. There's probably, I think there's some weak 4s back here that I may want to rebuild. But at some point, I'm going to start buying up the artillery for my offensive. And I want to do that soon because I want to be able to launch an as powerful as possible offensive, either here or here. That gives me an opportunity. I don't have to do both. I can do one or the other and then start swinging troops as needed to one side or the other of that bulge. There's an advantage to attacking on this front, which is that the Brits can throw into that same offensive. I can do a joint offensive that's less damaging to the French, and some of those powerful British infantry can help a great deal in getting a little bit more strength. Of course, there's a disadvantage to that. Largely, this is the only hex where the Brits are actually right in with the French. And, you know, I'm not going to get as many British units as I'd like. They are better and more powerful, but just the way the front line has developed, I could push another British hex on the front, but that would string out the Brits and make them a little weaker than I'd like, although they've been getting a lot of replacements or a lot of reinforcements recently. So they actually could take another hex, and that would perhaps be a more powerful attack. But without limiting things, this just seems more appealing right now than over here. Can't be sure, though. If the Germans are weaker over here, I'll probably make an attack here or here. Or here. One of these 3 hexes. Well, I don't know. This up here is painful with the terrain. But these 2 hexes are both clear hexes, as is this one, as is this one. It gives me a lot of opportunities that I can choose from. The Germans have to defend all those hexes a little heavier than everything else. There are also some hexes where I've got 2 hexes facing one of theirs, which if those get stripped too weak, I'll make the choice on. Well, since this is the end of the month and I was planning on trying to push another month into this video, but I think I'll just fit this one in, and that'll be the August month.